I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime. Cameron, can you define the word farce for me? What is a farce?
fake.
Elaborate.
No. Like a ruse or a fake scenario, or do I not know what it is?
So, like, when we talk about it in literature, we're often talking about something that's like an absurdity, right?
Well, nothing feels absurd to me because everything feels absurd to me.
Okay.
That's why I was saying a fake scenario.
It doesn't even, it doesn't seem possible. It doesn't seem like it could happen.
Well, that's how you know it's fake, because it's impossible.
But they're real. They do happen, and I want to know if you ever felt like you were living in one.
Please. Every day of my life.
You know, I feel like I'm living in a farce most every day because it feels like things happen all the time that couldn't possibly happen to a regular person.
Yeah, that is actually something that people have told me when I tell them things that have happened in my life or in my week. And they are like, that doesn't feel real. Or like this week, through tears, they were like, that's a lot for one person.
Andrew will do this thing where if we're out somewhere, it never fails that someone stops and talks to me, and he'll always ask me, how do you know that person? And he knows now that the answer is always, I don't. Who is it? I don't know why they're talking to me. I never know who it is. I don't know who these people are that talk to me and approach me out in the wild. Today's story, sometimes colloquially known or better known as the Legend of Cocaine Island, is in and of itself truly the definition of farce. On December 11th, 2013, Rodney Hyden, a 50-something-year-old general contractor, was found guilty of the possession of 5+ kilograms of cocaine with the intention to distribute, a crime which carries a minimum mandatory sentence of 120 months in jail. But before we can fully understand Rodney Hyden's case, we have to discuss things like turtle eggs, a drug kingpin named Carlos, and Andy, the happy-go-lucky drug addict that couldn't help but make trouble in the most unexpected of ways. And then the man himself, Rodney, who seemingly sets the monolithic standard by which all white middle-aged Central Floridian men are compared. Nich Schager of the Daily Beast most aptly describes Rodney Hyden by saying, he's like a Coen Brothers protagonist come to full-bodied life, an everyman who thought so highly of himself that he forgot about or ignored the age-old maxim regarding honor and thieves. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get into the wild details of Rodney Hyden's descent into crime...
Please tell me that you're not going to say something weird about what turtle legs are, because I am still traumatized by dog legs.
Nothing like that. We have to take a step back and kind of examine who Rodney Hyden is and how he became that person. Rodney was born into a poor family, and every dollar mattered. His childhood was marked by a financial struggle. There were often times that his parents would take out loans just to purchase Christmas gifts. That's the kind of financial strain they lived under. But despite the hardships, Rodney's father was a man of immense kindness. He was the kind of person that would give you the shirt off his back if you were in need, even if that meant that his family went without. And while Rodney says and states that he admires his father's generosity, he saw how that punished him and his family. Rodney learned a lot from his father. His father would take him onto construction sites, and he actually kind of got to watch his father grow in his profession. However, the lesson that stuck with him the most was, and this is a quote, don't depend on anyone else to get what you want. And this mantra became the driving force in Rodney's life. He was determined to build a better future for himself and to escape the cycle of poverty that defined his childhood.
So that motto is similar to what I have heard women, especially older women, like a generation or two above me, say that they always made sure that they could, if their husband left them, that they were never unable to take care of themselves, so that they weren't solely dependent on their husband. That's what that kind of makes me think of, or like the reference point that gives me.
You saying that makes me think of the song Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. By the time Rodney had reached full adulthood, he had met his wife, Jamie. He was a Central Florida man and she was a Central Florida woman. And for whatever relevance that holds to both of them, that's kind of how they describe themselves. They both had a child from a previous marriage, and when they decided to get married, they did so in a quiet ceremony at a bed and breakfast with their children, Jamie's parents, and about 4 or so of their close friends. Rodney had found his calling in construction. He started at the bottom and he worked his way up. And it didn't take long for him to realize that he was making really good money for someone else. As Jamie is quoted as saying, Rodney was making good money, but he was making them even better money. They were making good money off him. Rodney was a hard worker, and he knew that if he wanted to make real money, he would have to be his own boss. So, with the encouragement of his wife Jamie, Rodney took the plunge and started his own business, R. Hyden Construction Incorporated. Why are you looking at me like that?
Well, for 2 reasons. One, his calling just so happens to be the thing that he learned a lot from his dad when he was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if Malcolm Gladwell had anything to say about it, it would not so much be that it was his calling, but he was good at it because he had a lot of practice with it.
Never read him.
It's good.
I'm sure. I believe that. Right. Sorry, I just haven't read it. Is he the one that wrote Blink?
Yes. And then the accent that you were doing.
Oh yeah, I don't think that's how Central Floridians talk, but there is a very country-esque air about Rodney and Jamie Hyden. Southern, backwoodsy, it's hard to categorize it as being Southern because it doesn't feel, it's so hard for me to explain. I think you're going to get a better understanding of it as I continue telling you the story. No, I'm going to try to refrain from doing more accents. And business was good. Really, really good. Rodney's company quickly became one of the most successful in Central Florida. He was commissioned and was constructing massive projects, hotels, motels. He was even responsible for the, quote, swamp box seats for Florida Stadium, and he was tasked with building the honors dorm for the University of Florida. Rodney was rolling in cash, and his company was booming. Rodney earned millions and millions of dollars, spanning from the late 90s through the mid-2000s. But with success came all the trappings of wealth. Rodney and Jamie were living the high life and continuously wanted more. They built a beautiful 3,600 square foot home in The Hammock, one of Miami-Dade County's premier suburbs. The house had a 3-car garage and an oversized swimming pool. Everything that they had ever dreamed of. But as time went on, their appetite for luxury grew. The house was not enough. So they bought a river home in Crystal River, a premier destination in Florida. And of course, once they had that, they needed a boat for the river house. And then once they had a boat, they also needed a jet ski. And why stop there?
You said the trappings of wealth, but I don't think this is the trappings of wealth. I think it is the trappings of wealth for someone who grew up feeling that they had to go without.
Right.
More so than the trappings of wealth, because I don't feel like Bezos feels trapped. I mean, that's extreme.
I think trappings will make more sense as I continue to contextualize, but I also hear what you're saying.
Okay.
And then, of course, why would they stop there? Rodney decided to treat himself to something he always wanted. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle. And Rodney's even quoted as saying, "We had lots of toys." So he knew that they were living a really excessive lifestyle. I tried really hard to find pictures of the homes that Rodney Hyden and his wife Jamie owned, and I couldn't seem to find any, but all of the description makes them sound really lavish, really excessive wealth, right? And maybe not an understanding of what to do with wealth. By the mid-2000s, the Hydens had it all. A beautiful home, a river house, luxury vehicles, and a lifestyle that most people only dreamed of.
And toys.
And lots of toys. Everything was going according to plan. That is until 2008. When the recession hit, it hit Central Florida real estate market particularly hard. The construction industry,
Just Central Florida's real estate market?
I'm sure others, but I know that the Central Florida real estate market, really the whole Florida real estate market.
The whole housing market burst in 2008.
Were some places not more affected than others?
I mean, I'm sure, but the whole economy kind of...
Yeah, no, obviously.
Caved in.
I think part of the issue is that Floridian properties were overinflated. And so when the recession happened, it was more damaging. But honestly, that's just something I feel like I know, but I don't know why I would ever think that. So the real estate market, the construction market that had been booming, came to a screeching halt. Projects were canceled, payments had been delayed, and that financial foundation the financial foundation that Rodney had built his life on had began to crumble. And then suddenly, the Haydens found themselves in a financial nightmare. The business that had once brought in millions of dollars was now just a shadow of what it was. And with no new projects on the horizon and mounting debts, Rodney was forced to make tough decisions. The river house? Gone. The boat and jet ski? Gone. And finally, the home in the hammock. The symbol of their success was gone too. Despite research, I couldn't determine if these properties were foreclosed or if they sold them before or if they sold them before foreclosure could happen.
Well, you said that he was making difficult decisions, like, do I keep my jet skis or not? So you were saying that they were making difficult decisions, but I don't know that it would be that difficult for me to decide, wow, do I don't even know what the situation would be where I would try to convince myself that jet skis were not the easy thing to let go of when my financial situation has flipped onto its head.
So what you're saying is you don't think the jet skis are necessary to survival.
What I'm saying is obviously they were foreclosed on.
There's something so surreal because most of the information I bring to you today,
A farce.
comes from the Netflix documentary, The Legend of Cocaine Island. And Rodney and Jamie were both a part of that production. And so they talk about it and they do a really good job of conveying how they felt throughout the situation. And you can just tell how much it hurt them to get rid of the boat and the jet skis.
But okay, I'm not gonna, I can't relate to this.
No.
I can't, because okay, if I really want to go out on a boat that bad, I can rent one. It's not exactly the same, but it is a lot easier on my pocket.
It's hard to imagine that part of their spending wasn't connected to image or perception or wanting to have the ability to say, oh, we are so wealthy that we can have these things.
Again, I go back to, if you grow up feeling like you had to go without, then when you get things, it is very difficult to part with them, even if that's the practical thing to do.
By the time the dust settled, Rodney was more than $1 million in debt.
Same. I'm not $1 million in debt.
No way.
But it feels like it.
Any debt feels like crazy debt.
Mm-hmm.
The life they had worked so hard to build had vanished, and they were left with virtually nothing. With no other options, Rodney and Jamie packed up what little they had left and moved to Piney Woods, a small rural community in Archer, Florida, composed of roughly 1,000 to 1,200 residents.
Wait, Piney Woods is in, okay, you said it was in where, Florida?
Archer.
So is it a community? Is it an apartment complex?
It's not an apartment complex. They're out in the country. It's very rural. It makes me think of how...
A commune?
So I'm thinking of it in terms of, growing up, I lived in Ray Point, but my postal address is still Three Rivers, not Ray Point. But I know that Ray Point is Ray Point,
right?
Not Three Rivers. So I think that's the same thing here with Piney Woods. I think it's more of a community with inside a township maybe, or next to a township. Their new home was a far cry from the luxury they had become accustomed to.
Did they start the tiny homes trend?
Their house still isn't tiny. For them, this was a real downgrade.
They probably had to see each other more.
They set up on a 40-acre lot in a double-wide trailer, surrounded by pine trees and dirt roads.
Only 40 acres?
Only 40. I know. There's no room to play. There's no room
The housing market did not do well, but the land market's doing just fine.
Well, and that's when they were talking about this situation and how they had moved onto these 40 acres, I was concerned, thinking, how did they afford 40 acres? And so part of me feels like maybe it was something he owned prior to. Like maybe he owned this property and it had become their fallback property, but I couldn't find anything that really said when they purchased it or anything like that. For Jamie, this was a living nightmare. She had gone from a 3,600 square foot home with a 3-car garage to a trailer in the middle of nowhere.
Jamie sounds like a simple Florida woman.
A simple Central Floridian woman. She let Rodney know, and in no uncertain terms, that this was not the life she signed up for. This was not it.
What? They were married before he started the business. This is the life you signed up for. Wasn't it her who said that he was making other people a lot of money?
Not according to Jamie. She said that, yes, what you just said she said. This still was not the life she signed up for. She did not sign up for a trailer.
Well, I think that the most important thing that I am taking away from this is I am grateful that I don't have simple Central Floridian women in my life.
Jamie
is a peach.
Throughout the duration of the documentary, I think it would be very difficult for the average person to sympathize with some of the things that she shares. She's lovely, wonderful, fan of Jamie.
Looks like Linda Evangelista.
Model. She is just really hard to sympathize with. And in the Netflix documentary, The Legend of Cocaine Island, Jamie recounts the horrors of the piney woods and is quoted as saying, "Our 2-year plan became a 3-year plan, then a 4-year plan, then a 5-year plan, then a 6-year plan, and then we're at 8 years, still in a double wide, when I had lived in a 3,600 square foot home with a 3-car garage." Jamie, then tearful, dramatically shares with the viewers a home the size of my 3-car garage.
Tearful?
Tearful. She was tearful, weepy, bereft.
Yeah. How many more synonyms are we getting?
And all I could think was, I would love to have a double wide home. Just a home, not an apartment. I mean, I would want it to be reasonably priced.
Yeah, I think that's where you and Jamie are not seeing eye to eye. She doesn't want to live in anything reasonably priced.
For Rodney, the move to the piney woods was a really humbling experience. He was no longer the successful contractor with a booming business or a lavish lifestyle. He was a man who'd lost everything and was struggling to provide for his family. The pressure to rebuild his life, to give his family the life they deserved, weighed heavily on him. But amidst the gloom, there was one thing that gave Rodney a sense of belonging and camaraderie, and that was the Piney Woods Happy Hour. The Piney Woods Happy Hour was a weekly gathering of the locals. They would come together to drink, smoke pot, and tell stories.
Whoa.
They say it. That's not me giving conjecture. We know that they were smoking some dope. I feel so old when I say smoking dope.
You are.
That's an old person phrase.
Welcome. We've been waiting.
It was a time that he could escape from the stresses of daily life, to forget about the bills, the debts, the worries, if only for a few hours. For Rodney, these gatherings were a lifeline. He was surrounded by people who, like him, had seen better days, but were still making efforts to be as happy as possible. This crew was a really eclectic mix. There was a man named Russell who, despite being more straight-laced than the others, still knew how to have a good time. Then we have Rodney.
Well, you did mention the dope, so...
Yeah, it seems like they all knew how to have a good time. Rodney was the happy-go-lucky optimist in this group, and he really seemed to take most things in stride, obviously taking things better than Jamie. Then there was Julian, an older hippie who had found his way to Florida after a stint working on a sea turtle conservation project in Culebra. Julian had been married once, but after his divorce, he left the turtle preservation project and ended up in the Piney Woods. There were other members of the happy hour crew, but their names, professions, and other general information were unavailable.
That's fine. We've already got Rodney and Russell and Jamie and...
I want to say,
Julian.
One of the weird things, so they don't tell us about the other members of the happy hour crew, but they then tell us, and one member of the crew had 2 pet elephants.
Yeah, this is a group of people who had to downgrade their lives and sell off things, and they come together to commiserate at happy hour. Sometimes they bring their pet elephants.
Isn't that wild? Not 1 pet elephant, 2.
It sounds domestic.
Explain.
You said, isn't that wild?
Oh, Ooh, a bit of a thinker on my part. This crew would get together every Saturday. And in addition to the drinking and the pot, they would tell stories.
Again, these are luxuries and some of them are not legal at this point, but this is where their money is going. They're sitting around complaining, I think in some cases at the very least, about how they don't have any money or, you know, the good old days, but they never, here's my guess, they never actually learned how to budget or to spend responsibly or work with a limited income, which same, but they're not making great choices. I think that you see that in the way that they spent when the money was good, but in the way that they also didn't save when the money was good. They bought jet skis and bonus houses and toys to the tune of what I imagine at the very least is $45,000.
So in addition to the drinking and the pot smoking, the Piney Woods Happy Hour would also tell stories. And at times, that became competitive. Who could tell the most outlandish, unbelievable, farcical story?
Were they betting elephants?
I don't know what was at stake.
I'm going to guess pride.
Pride.
Because I feel like that's at the root of a lot of what we've got going on here.
Yeah, it does seem to be a motif throughout this story. One of the most famous, or rather infamous, stories was told by Julian, and it was the legend of Cocaine Island. Everyone in Piney Woods had heard the story numerous times, and each time it seemed to grow a little wilder, a little more embellished, but the core of the story remained the same. Julian had found a shit ton of cocaine and he had hidden it in fear.
My uncle who passed recently, when we were visiting him and we were at one of his friends' houses on the lake and they were drinking because we were kids, but they were not. And it was either him or his friend. I can't remember. I think it was my uncle. But he was telling this story about this really big fish that they caught. And every time he would talk about the fish, like show you what size it was bigger than it was 2 seconds ago. Similarly, my grandpa was out hunting once and he was approached by a black bear. And so he shot it and he's telling the story about this huge bear that had approached him while he was out hunting, and he had sent the bear off to have it made into a bearskin rug. And when that thing came in, it was like, this is a teenager. This is a small bear. So I can only imagine what this story, this legend of Cocaine Island,
fueled by alcohol and marijuana and wanting to one-up your buddies.
Yeah, I can only imagine where this is going.
Well, let me tell you.
Is it going to Cocaine Island?
Julian's story takes us back to the 1980s. Julian was living a completely different life back then. He worked with his wife on a sea turtle preservation project in Culebra, which is a small island in Puerto Rico. It was an idyllic setting, sunny beaches, turquoise waters, and a laid-back lifestyle. But one day, something happened that would change the course of Julian's life forever. It was a day like any other. Julian was out on the mostly deserted coastline, searching for sea turtles as part of his conservation work. The beach was quiet, the kind of place where you could lose yourself in thought, surrounded only by the sounds of the waves and the call of seabirds. As he walked along the shore, something unusual caught his eye. A large, airtight bag bobbing in the water. Julian, being the curious man that he is, waded into the water and pulled the bag ashore. He had heard stories about things like bags of drugs washing up on remote beaches, lost at sea by smugglers, or abandoned in haste. And as an avid cannabis user...
And here I thought he was more interested in the welfare of the wildlife.
The sea turtles. Well, Julian was an avid cannabis user, and he had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this bag would be filled with marijuana. Cannabis was kind of hard to come by on the island of Culebra, and Julian had struggled to find it. But as Julian examined the bag, he quickly became nervous. This was no bag of weed. Inside, the bricks were tightly packed. Fearing what he stumbled upon, Julian hid the bag, moving it to different locations over the first few nights after discovering it.
I think you're burying the lead, but I'm pretty sure it's bricks of cocaine because that's the title of the case.
He was paranoid, constantly worried that someone might see him with it, that the authorities might come knocking on his door. And finally, after days of moving the bag around, Julian decided to take it home and stash it in his storage shed. There, away from prying eyes, he finally mustered the courage to open one of the bricks. What he found inside was not marijuana, it was cocaine.
Cocoa beans?
Cocoa powder. And not just any cocaine. This was high quality.
How does he know?
Okay, this cannabis connoisseur has definitely had some nose candy. I don't think that he hasn't tried. You know, one of the things that I thought about as I was doing this case and working on it was
detox.
how, sure, yes, but just how many people in everyday life do cocaine? Do you feel like you know adults who do cocaine?
I feel like I know 2 people who have said as adults that they have done it because it was available and kind of like a why not? I don't have anything to do tomorrow. But other than that, no. I know 2 people who have tried it. Now, maybe they weren't being 100% forthright with me, but
I know people who love cocaine.
I know 2 people who have told me that they've told me in the days after, either immediately after or in the week after, oh, I did cocaine on this day. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Good for you. I'm glad you did your cocaine. It's not for, I'm so afraid that my heart would explode if I ever tried with cocaine.
Well, and if the last 2 weeks has taught me anything, I think that's a fair concern.
It's just, cocaine is way more commonly used than I ever thought it was as a kid or even a teenager.
Nope, I'm still there. That's still my reality. It's less commonly used than I think.
Okay. So once Julian realized that he had some high quality cocaine on his hand, he also realized that getting caught with it could lead him to big trouble.
Better do it.
He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a drug dealer, and he had no interest in getting involved with the cocaine trade. But he also knew that what he stumbled upon was valuable, life-changing. After doing some rough, and this is how he refers to it, brick math, Julian estimated that he had nearly 70 pounds of cocaine on his hands.
I thought you were going to say after doing some rough lines.
Julian is really a character.
No.
Yeah. And this amount of coke was more than he had ever imagined. And Julian even thought to himself, wow, this is more coke than I could ever even do. In the end, Julian decided to keep a small amount of that cocaine for himself.
In his flour jar?
Well, just enough to fit into his jelly jar.
Oh, I was making a joke.
Yeah, that's what made it funny.
Oh.
Well, no, it was funny outside of that, but it's because I knew he'd put it in a fucking jar, a jelly jar. And
must be jelly.
Yeah, because jam don't shake. So he put some of this highly delicious pinkish white cocaine in his jelly jar.
What is this, Bermuda sand? Pink?
I don't know. That's just how it's described.
Delicious. What?
He said it was high quality stuff. Delicious was my word. My apologies. So he keeps that just for special occasions. And he takes the rest of the cocaine. This man, I hate that he calls it brick math, because what he did is he grabbed a container of the cocaine and he would step on the scale and off the scale to measure the amount of each brick.
He's an idiot.
That was his brick math. When he said brick math, that's what he was doing. Anyway, so the rest of the cocaine that wasn't in the jelly jar, he decided to bury between his mobile home and a nearby cistern. It was a decision born out of fear and uncertainty. He felt like it was a good way to hide the cocaine and avoid the dangers that would come with its discovery. As the years went by, Julian's life took lots of twists and turns. He and his wife got divorced, and she stayed behind at the turtle preservation. And Julian made his way to Piney Woods, It was there, among this new circle of friends, that Julian began sharing his now infamous story whenever he could. The tale of Cocaine Island became a staple of Piney Woods lore, a story that everyone had heard at least a dozen times, but no one ever grew tired of it. And for Rodney Hyden,
what about this story makes it that incredible?
I think this idea that he was walking along the shoreline, working on his sea turtle conservation efforts, and sees, from my understanding, this big black floating package and the discovery of cocaine. Now, seeing Julian and seeing how his friends talk about him, it's very clear that he's an animated storyteller. He is giving it his all every time he tells the story.
Sure, but how many times can you hear, I was walking along, there was a bag, I went and got it, it had cocaine in it, I buried it, I got divorced.
You know, there are some stories, there are some jokes that get me every time.
I imagine that there were other stories that were shared at this happy hour that were probably more entertaining to hear on repeat.
There are some people who are such, and I know we've already talked about this, they're such charismatic storytellers. Like, I could listen to my Aunt Nancy tell me the same story that she's told me a million times, and I still don't get tired of it.
About your one-act shoes?
Yeah. In addition to never growing tired of this story, Rodney Hyden took this story and it kind of grew into an obsession for him. But whether Rodney was looking for a way to relive his youth or correct past mistakes or simply find a way out of the financial hell he found himself in, one thing was clear. He latched onto Julian's story with a desperation that blinded him to the risk and the reality of what he was getting into. One of the things that, so at this point, Rodney Hyden is really thinking of Julian's story as being a way out of his perceived destitution. He still has his construction business, and at that point in time, there were 2 employees, him and someone else. I don't know who the other person was. And they were billing less than $600,000 a year. Now, to me, I have no idea what that means. I don't know how much money you would make from billing out $600,000 worth of work, but he was so desperate to provide for his wife the way he had and for his family the way he had that he really began to consider, can I use this story that Julian told me and make money from it?
Can you put yourself there? You're at happy hour. And Julian, who you have said is quite the character and an entertaining storyteller. If he's telling you this story about some far off island where he once lived on a turtle conservation, whatever, and he's talking about, and then I found this cocaine, it just washed ashore and I carried it around from place to place, not really sure. I mean, it sounds like a dog with a really tasty bone. You know, they're trying to hide it from somebody else. Oh no, somebody else is going to want this bone. But Julian sounds to me like the person who's telling a story and I'm like, wow, this is entertaining. I don't believe you.
Julian is so full of shit it makes the toilet bowl jealous.
Yeah.
That's what I think I would feel. I certainly wouldn't give any credence to what he was saying.
Right. Even, I mean, let's be real, if I'm this desperate for money, I can't afford to even consider going to Cocaine Island to go collect the cocaine that's buried next to the
mobile home and cistern.
Just...
It's so preposterous. It, again, like you said, it's a great story, but I think that's just what it is. A story, a fictional piece created by Julian.
Just like if we run back the one-act shoes and get to the origin of that, it's like there's nothing here.
It's a fascinating narrative. With all of that being said, Rodney obviously was not thinking rationally. He began to really toy around with the idea of going to Cocaine Island and profiting off of the cocaine.
Who could have seen this coming?
So Rodney decides to
Decides is crazy.
I've never done it on purpose. Rodney decides.
To shart, yeah. We got it.
To share this story with Andy Culpepper, a young man who had become something of a surrogate son to him. Now, this is not my description. Andy was a drug addict who had fallen on hard times, and Rodney had taken him under his wing. Now, whether Andy was a friend of Rodney's son from a previous marriage or someone Rodney had picked up off the street is unclear. The Daily Beast, in addition to the Netflix documentary, in addition to Rodney and Jamie's daughter, Emily, there's all of this confusion around what is the actual relationship between Andy Culpepper and Rodney Hyden. And it's funny because two different people say it's two different things, or maybe three people say it's two different things in the Netflix documentary itself. And then the article published by the Daily Beast also says something different. So for the purposes of our story, I'm just going to refer to him as Rodney's nephew.
Okay.
Andy refers to Rodney as uncle. And one of the interesting things about Andy to me is he is self-described in the documentary. And he says, I don't have a drug problem. I do drugs. And I have done drugs. But nowadays it's no problem.
He's like, the only problem I have is when I can't afford them.
The only problem is when people say I have a problem. He also refers to Rodney as a cool ass dude, loyal as fuck.
Or uncle.
Rodney took Andy under his wing. Now, Rodney never seemed to trust Andy enough to give him complicated work, but he would take Andy with him from construction site to construction site. And Rodney would pay Andy about $10 an hour to run errands for him, like cleaning his truck. It also seemed as if Andy and Rodney may have done drugs together. What is clear, though, is that Andy was not the most reliable person to be partnering with in a scheme such as a cocaine recovery mission.
Based on also an unreliable character, Julian's bullshit story.
So much is built in this case on conjecture and what ifs and possibilities. Nothing is concrete.
And no one is reliable.
No. Now, I know you're not going to believe this. Andy was eager to get involved with this cocaine scheme. He saw it as a chance to make some easy...
He saw it as a chance to not have problems.
His supply would not dwindle anytime soon. He saw it as a chance to make easy money. And he did not hesitate to...
So was cocaine not his drug of choice?
I think most drugs were his drug of choice.
So why is
from my
he
understanding,
selling it?
So he can buy more of the drugs I guess he primarily wants.
That's what I'm saying. It's not his drug of choice. If it was...
I think that some people like multiple types of drugs.
Okay, I'm sure.
Yeah. So... Andy had no problem kind of pumping Rodney up, encouraging him that this was a great idea. And together, they formulated a plan to retrieve the buried cocaine. However, unfortunately for them, they realized that they were in over their heads. Neither of them had any experience in the drug trade. They also had no idea how to go about retrieving and selling such a large quantity of cocaine. I wouldn't know how to sell a gram of cocaine, much less 70 pounds.
It is buffoonery.
It is, at the highest level. That's when Danny Jimenez, a.k.a. D, a.k.a. the Cuban, as he was known, entered the picture. One day when Rodney went to pick up Andy, Danny was waiting with him. Hey man, I can help you with that story, is what Danny told Rodney. And while Rodney did not immediately understand what Danny was referring to, he put it together pretty quickly. He knew that Danny was a shady character with connections to the drug trade.
How?
I think maybe because he was hanging out with Andy. I think he knew anyone who was hanging out with Andy was probably of a certain background. Here's what I understand about how Andy knows Danny and vice versa. Andy was going around telling people the story of Cocaine Island, like bragging about it to people, and how he and his friend were going to retrieve it and sell it.
Oh, so he does have a problem. His mouth.
That Miss Mouth Almighty running about telling people about this cocaine plan. And I think that's how Danny learns of it. And of course, Danny says, oh, I can help you. I know all about drugs and drug trades. Danny presents as a shady character with connections to the drug trade, and he offers to help Rodney and Andy retrieve the buried cocaine. Danny is quoted in the documentary as saying, prison is college for criminals. Danny claimed to know a man named Carlos, a drug kingpin with his own private airplane and a drug-dealing pilot who could fly them to Culebra, find the cocaine, and bring it back to Florida.
Does that make jail a community college?
Free for all. College for all. As Danny makes this proposal, he offers, per the story that Rodney has conveyed, that they are likely looking at 32 keys, short for kilos, which translates into, quote, millions of dollars of profit. And in March of 2012, after several visits with Danny, Rodney decides that this was the break he'd been waiting for. Danny seemed to have all the connections and expertise they needed to pull off the job. The primary connection, Carlos, agreed to meet with Danny and Rodney. They met in a restaurant or bar, I'm not exactly sure.
There's a lot that I'm not exactly sure about.
The way it's conveyed is kind of like a dark room in a restaurant in the documentary, because of course it's going side by side with constructed footage.
Yeah, because all of this is just a bad movie.
It is a bad movie.
And it's a scene straight out of a bad movie. And you know what? The movie might be good.
On IMDb, it's a 6.1.
But wait.
Yeah. Well,
the documentary. I'm saying this whole scenario is a bad movie.
Yeah.
Some goon says something about burying cocaine that washed up on a shore, or that he swam to get while he was trying to conserve turtles.
Extra group story time. Or people try to one-up each other.
Right. And so then you decide that that's going to be the mission that you're going to go on. And oh, this guy, who is also not somebody who is trustworthy or can keep their mouth shut, is who you're going to go into it with. And y'all are going to go retrieve this cocaine. And then this guy on the corner is like, hey, I heard about your cocaine scheme. I'm the perfect person to help you get the most bang for your buck. And we're going to go have some conversation under some dimly lit light bulb in some back alley restaurant. It's all just a movie. This is a movie. It's stupid.
A poorly written movie.
It's stupid.
Literally meant to be a farce. So again, they're meeting in this restaurant or bar that's dimly lit, and Rodney can't help but think about how cool Carlos is. He recounts that Carlos
is wearing a leather jacket. Yeah, he's super cool.
He said that Carlos reminded him of the character Tony Montana from the movie Scarface. And in fact, Rodney speaks about Carlos as if he idolized him at that time period. When he met Carlos explained to Rodney that he had a private airplane, a double-engine Queen jet. They devised a plan for Rodney to go down to Puerto Rico, find the stash, and bring it back. Carlos made it a point to tell Rodney that he and Rodney would never be able to ride together, as he would then see Carlos's tail numbers. I think those are numbers on the back of the plane. And Carlos's only real reason is him saying, I don't know you like that. Carlos, after having visited with Rodney and hearing his story, starts referring to the bricks of supposed cocaine as turtle eggs, and shares that he will charge Rodney 4 turtle eggs to bring back the cocaine.
I knew turtle eggs was about to be some BS.
All Rodney had to do was trust Danny and follow his lead. In March 2012, Rodney and Andy set off for Puerto Rico, with dreams of millions of dollars worth of cocaine dancing in their heads. The plan was simple. They would fly to Culebra, dig up the cocaine, and bring it back to Florida where they could sell it for a small fortune. As the twosome started their adventure, they experienced a terrible flight to San Juan, filled with storms and turbulence. So even the beginning of their story into picking up this cocaine starts terribly. They are thrown around by wind and rain and gust.
In what year did Julian bury this cocaine?
The late 1980s.
They are morons.
Morons. At this point, it was 30 years, right?
Right. What? No one else has come across what? Okay. I can't.
They flew from San Juan to Culebra, which was a smoother ride, and they landed on Flamenco Beach, which I only mention that because I found out it's the #1 beach in the world. I don't know who decides those metrics, but
the world.
That's what it said. From the moment they arrived in Puerto Rico, Rodney was cosplaying as a big-time drug dealer.
As you do.
They arrive in Puerto Rico, and Rodney decides that he and Andy are going to go out for dinner. Also, it is just Rodney and Andy that are on this adventure, that have taken this plane to the island. Just those two.
Carlos's plane?
Carlos's plane.
But Carlos didn't come.
No. Neither did Danny. Just Rodney and his henchmen that he doesn't even trust.
Just the blind leading the blind.
So he decides they're going to go out to dinner. And because Rodney felt like he was a real big timer, they went to a restaurant where when you ordered the lobster, the staff would go out and retrieve fresh lobster for you. And Rodney and Andy both tackled 5-pound lobsters, which ultimately left Andy sick and unable to help Rodney the first day he went to go find the cocaine.
And then there was one.
There was one. Rodney all on his own. And Rodney was not happy about Andy being sick.
Why is Julian not there?
You know, that is a question I asked myself multiple times. And I ask myself that question even more fiercely later on. Also, Rodney evidently gave Andy a bunch of shit about being sick because, of course, Andy said it was from eating 5 pounds of lobster. And Rodney said, no, you're just going through withdrawal.
But if you got out here and found this cocaine,
you could.
We could fix that problem.
Believe it or not, the island of Culebra had changed significantly since Julian's time there in the 80s. What was once a secluded spot where you might stumble upon a buried treasure was now much more developed and populated. The mobile home where Julian had supposedly buried the cocaine was long gone, replaced by a pile of debris. This was the first sign, arguably, that their quest for the cocaine was not going to be as straightforward as they hoped. To make matters worse, Rodney was unbelievably unprepared. Rodney, again, who had made his fortune off of construction projects, had overlooked the basic logistics of a treasure hunt. He brought no digging equipment, and he assumed he would be able to find a shovel once he got there. And it's so funny because Rodney says to himself in the documentary, yeah, there's just no Walmart around for me to go buy a shovel.
It's an island.
He was not prepared to not have a Walmart. They were left to...
I'm sorry. Nope. I'm going to need a little bit more of a moment of silence.
Yeah, he could not believe there was not a Mega Mart to pick up supplies.
Where's the damn Home Depot?
That's how they talk on King of the Hill. So Rodney was left to dig with his bare hands in whatever rudimentary tools he could come up with.
Bare hands is crazy.
Bare hands. And then I think Andy does join him later, and they both try to dig with their fucking hands. Just their hands. To make matters worse, the soil in Culebra was not the soft, beachy sand they had envisioned. It was a hardened mixture of coral, sediment, and rainwater deposits.
Almost like Julian didn't actually bury some washed up cocaine on the island.
He wouldn't have been able to bury it. The soil was practically impenetrable without heavy machinery. And after hours of fruitless digging, it became clear that they were not going to find anything that day. They were forced to abandon the search.
Yeah, just that day.
They were forced to abandon the search and return to Florida empty-handed, much to Rodney's growing despair. I thought it was really funny in the documentary.
It was.
When Rodney says, I'm in construction. You need a backhoe to make a dent in this shit. And it's just, I can't imagine not doing any cursory research before going.
A private plane. Put a shovel on the plane.
Put something.
You're not even having to deal with customs, really.
At least a trowel.
I mean, you probably can't fit your backhoe on the plane, but...
After not locating the cocaine, Rodney was defeated. On the way home, the plane was searched by customs.
Oh, I take that back.
And not just searched by customs, but searched hard. Carlos was not pleased to hear about any of this. He was not pleased to hear about the not finding the cocaine. He also was not pleased to hear that they had been stopped by customs. They had already invested a lot of time and resources into this venture, and Carlos was not going to let it go. Ultimately, they figured that the lot of turtle eggs was close to being worth $2 million. Carlos made it clear that they would need to try again.
Based on a story from Happy Hour Drunken High Story Time from somebody who was a character. Yeah, we're banking on $2 million here. This is stupid.
I agree. This time they would try again with a better plan and better equipment. Carlos also told Rodney that he wouldn't be having any of this backing out shit. Carlos explained to Rodney that as a Puerto Rican, there were things that he could do that Rodney the gringo could not. So Rodney went to go visit his buddy Julian again. And when he did, he had Julian help him rework the map to the cocaine. And I want to say in my notes, I made a little comment to myself. Oh my God, why did they just not cut him in and take him on the trip? He hid the cocaine. Take the person who hid the cocaine, supposedly.
Because he didn't. He found some little vial of cocaine, snorted it, and then brought this story to story time. And here we are.
Rodney then took the map to Carlos, and Carlos said, no, Rodney, you're not coming this time. You're staying at home.
You should have asked me if I've ever come across drugs, because I have.
Oh, in your classroom?
No, I was walking Nellie in my apartment.
I've never
found a bag of marijuana.
I've never found drugs in the wild.
I don't think most people have found drugs in the wild, but you're telling this story and it makes me remember that I have found drugs in the wild.
Was it 32 kilos worth?
I mean, I didn't get on and off my scale.
What an inefficient way. He's so dumb.
Also, it didn't happen.
Well, Carlos believed otherwise. And he said, Rodney, you're not going this time. And we're changing the terms of the deal. I'm going to be taking 8 kilos instead of 4. And Rodney said, wow, what a gentleman. You're going to do all the work and still give me money? Perfect. The second attempt was obviously meant to be different. With Carlos at the lead, he would personally fly to Culebra, dig up the cocaine, and bring it back. All Rodney had to do was wait for the call. This arrangement seemed ideal to Rodney. He wouldn't have to get his hands dirty, and he would still walk away with a significant portion of the profits. After several days of anxious waiting, Rodney really started to sweat. And then, seemingly miraculously, to soothe his anxiety, Carlos contacted Rodney with the news that he'd been hoping for. He found the cocaine. Carlos sent Rodney a picture as proof, a grainy, low-quality image via BlackBerry that supposedly showed a few bricks of cocaine buried in the ground. Then a second picture came. I did not describe it this way. This is how it was described. 13 pairs of kilos, or 26 kilos in total. This cocaine treasure and its benefits would soon be Rodney's. Rodney even shares that he would just dream about the cocaine. He would just dream about these mountains of powder that he was going to profit from.
Funny thing, I think this cocaine is a dream.
A pipe dream.
I think he's not the only one who dreamed up this cocaine.
Carlos arranged a meeting with Rodney to hand over the cocaine. Rodney wanted to bring Danny along, but Carlos refused. Initially, Carlos suggested they meet at the World Golf Hall of Fame, but at the last minute, Carlos changed their meeting location to Gander Mountain. Do you know what Gander Mountain is?
No.
I think it's like a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shop, like a really large outdoor store.
And all I could think of was Candy Mountain.
Not Gander Mountain. Gander Mountain is for hunting and fishing and sporting and shooting and root tooting. Rodney had half an hour to arrive. Otherwise, the deal would be off. The change in plans concerned Rodney. He began to worry that Carlos was going to rip him off somehow or another. However, the promise of sweet cocaine and its hopeful delivery of riches was worth the risk for Rodney. Rodney hightailed it to the Gander Mountain parking lot. He shared that he had parked at the end of the parking lot, Rodney hightailed it to the Gander Mountain parking lot. He shared that he had parked at the end of the... Carlos shared that he had parked at the end of the parking lot and that Rodney must come inside to meet him as he was shopping for a fishing pole for his son. Once Rodney found Carlos, Carlos instructed him to go open the trunk of his car and take what was inside. Rodney, heart pounding, did as he was told. Inside the trunk were 18 bricks of pure, uncut cocaine. Rodney grabbed the drugs and moved
straight off the island. Did they look like they'd been buried for 30 years in coral?
In rainwater runoff, deposit, sediment.
Or were they pristine?
Rodney grabbed the drugs and began moving them to his own car when the St. Johns County Sheriff and Homeland Security showed up. The parking lot was swarming with law enforcement officers.
That's a really inconvenient time for them to be there. because he's transporting cocaine from Carlos's trunk into his own vehicle.
18 bricks of it.
18 bricks of it.
Rodney was arrested on the spot and was charged with attempting to possess over 5 kilograms of cocaine with the intent to distribute. I'm going to take a pause here and take you back 6 months. D, or Danny, or the Cuban, as he was known, was pulled over, searched, and found to be hiding 130 OxyContin pills, these are his words quoted, in his cooch.
No.
He calls it his cooch, but the police officer that's interviewed in the documentary
doesn't use that lingo.
No, he says behind his ball sack. After being arrested, Danny used his double jointedness to his advantage, slipped out of the cuffs, and ran away from the police. Danny knew that he had to run because he had already been to prison 3 times, and if he were to be charged again, he would be looking at life.
His doctoral degree.
A thesis that would never finish. So police offered Danny a deal when they caught him. If he were to work with them and help them score a bigger criminal than himself, they'd set him free. And Danny, he was no chump. He recognized a good deal when he saw one. So he told the police about the alleged treasure hunt that Rodney Hyden was pursuing. So in March of 2012, Danny was connected to a wire and cam, capturing footage of an overconfident Rodney, bragging about what an easy scam this treasure hunt would be. That footage proved to be more than enough for Homeland Security to become involved with the case. At this point, Danny was hooked up to Deputy Sheriff Raleigh, and later, Ryan McEnany, we're going to call him Ryan McEnany.
I think we're going to call them all 3.
From Homeland Security. So Ryan McEnany from Homeland Security. Homeland?
From Homeland Security.
Well, Joe had reached out to McEnany because no one in his own office believed him. No one could believe this preposterous story of a man wanting to travel to Cocaine Island and bring the drugs back to the United States. This is not important, but one of the interesting things that is discussed is how Raleigh, this deputy sheriff, worked part-time in a building that had actually been constructed by Hayden.
Can you walk me through what about this story was unbelievable?
You know, I think what the sheriff's office probably found to be the least believable is that there was only 32 kilos. I think they knew the score had to be bigger than that. I think that they also had doubt in Julian's measuring system of holding the cocaine packages and stepping on and off his scale. They think that he missed part of the volume, part of the weight.
Okay, I'm with you now.
Yeah, now we're on the same page. Rodney's actions obviously caught the attention of Homeland Security, and they painted him as a fool.
Did they? Or
was he just a fool?
Was it them?
Part of this is from his perspective, right? A man so naive that he literally handed over a map to illicit drugs. Something that law enforcement involved in this.
A man so naive that he thought that this guy who lent him his private plane was going to also go get this cocaine after Rodney was unsuccessful the first time and was going to bring it back and still give him a cut.
You know, you're talking about these drugs like they don't exist. And they were found.
Carlos never left the States.
Carlos found those drugs.
Carlos did not leave Florida.
Those drugs were found and accounted for.
All right, get back to Danny D, the Cuban.
Okay, so law enforcement had never encountered a criminal just handing over a map to illicit drugs. And on August 10th, 2012, Rodney was indicted for attempting to possess, with the intent to distribute, over 5 kilograms of cocaine. The indictment spelled it out clearly. Rodney was caught in a crime of anticipation, not because of what he physically possessed, but because of what he intended to possess.
Well, then I'm going to go down the street to the Lamborghini dealership and I'm going to order something on what I intend to possess, which is $1 million. So it should be affordable for me.
I think it's a great analogy. Rodney himself later reflected on this moment of his indictment and said, "The ride to jail didn't bother me. The night in jail didn't bother me. Being stupid didn't bother me."
That's good.
That's good because it's a lot of stupid. it's hard for me to feel sympathetic. He talks about how more than anything he's upset because he feels like he let down his family. And sir, I can't. You can't get it from me. You're not getting sympathy.
Well, no, not for letting down your family by believing some harebrained scheme about cocaine being buried on some faraway island. And you're going to take Julian's word for it. And you're like, I'm going to provide for my family.
He's so stupid. Homeland Security agents contacted Jamie, his wife, informing her that Rodney had been incarcerated. Rodney later broke down in tears, lamenting the fact that police and Homeland Security never gave him a chance to come forward and be honest. If they would have just let him come forward and be honest, they could have avoided all of this.
If they had let who come forward and be honest?
Rodney. If they would have just asked him about it and let him admit his scheme, they wouldn't have had to have punished him like this. They wouldn't have had to have charged him. Jamie describes the situation a little differently. She compares the federal agents who worked on Rodney's case as being the snake in the Garden of Eden, tempting Rodney with forbidden fruit that he couldn't resist.
Well, here's what I hate. That I don't completely disagree with Jamie.
I don't either.
But I don't actually want to be able to relate on any level to this simple Central Florida woman.
I have a hard time reducing the breadth of this buffoonery down to, oh, my husband was tempted. I think that the scope of it is so much larger than Jamie making a biblical comparison. So it does make sense. I can see the connection, but it's not quite enough for me.
Well, I guess my issue is because I see that. I do see that. He made a conscious decision
over and over again.
Multiple steps of the way, right. But had he not been provided with the plane that they weren't going to send back for a second time after the first time was... The biggest issue that I have is that the most he was going to be able to try to sell was going to be coral and sand sediment because the cocaine wasn't there. The cocaine did not exist.
According to the federal government, the cocaine does exist and it was retrieved. I'm being so serious.
That is ridiculous. This island.
Mm-hmm.
Culebra. Where is it?
Puerto Rico.
So a U.S. territory.
See.
No, the cocaine wasn't there. The cocaine doesn't exist. I want to see the receipts.
Well,
I want to see where they went there and they found it. And I want to see the media coverage.
You're much like Rodney.
I want to see the media coverage of them discovering enough cocaine to power New York City, I imagine.
So
how can you arrest somebody for... Okay. I go to your house.
Okay.
I'm welcomed into your home.
Mm-hmm. Bit of a stretch, but all right.
Yeah. While I'm there, I'm like, if I see any cash laying around, I'm going to take it. Mm-hmm. But there is no cash laying around. I even look. I look under a mattress. There's no cash. So when I leave, did I commit a crime? Can I be arrested for that?
Only the crime of being nosy.
But he didn't. There was no cocaine. Yes, he made decisions every step of the way. I am aware of that. Mm-hmm. But if my decision that I made is when I go to your home, I'm going to look for money. And if I find money, I'm taking it. But there is no money. Is there a crime? It's wrong. Mm-hmm. It's wrong that I went to your home and I was expecting to find money. And if I did, boy howdy, that was going to pay for my dinner on the way. But the cocaine wasn't there. He was never actually in possession of the cocaine until they hand delivered it to him in a public place that was already swarming with police.
Right. I think...
And that cocaine was not from the island of Culebra.
So they, and I will talk about it, but they stand by that part of the cocaine that was in the trunk that Rodney was collecting was from Cocaine Island. They also admit that it was supplemented with other cocaine and sham cocaine. And your analogy works great. I think in this situation, there's the specificity of how much. So, okay, if you see any money lying around, you're going to take it. But I guess the difference here, and I'm not saying it makes it right or wrong or whatever.
Right.
You know, if you found 87 cents, but your plan was to take $1, and then Homeland Security came in and dropped another 13 cents so that it was a whole dollar, and now you've taken $1.
if I come in and I am like, I need $1,000. I'm looking for that money. I mean, right? You're not putting 87 cents between your mattress, like under your mattress. So I come in and I'm looking for $1,000 and I don't find anything. I'm looking for $1,000, but there's not even a 5. But if there were, would I have bothered taking it if I needed $1,000? Maybe. But I guess you're saying that if the intent was to come in and get $1,000 and the only thing I did walk away with was 87 cents or nothing, that matters. And I understand that. But what you're saying is that the bulk of what they brought to that parking lot was sham cocaine and not the cocaine from Cocaine Island.
So,
like, that is the $20 and they brought $1,000.
I'm going to cover it 2 paragraphs down. So I'm going to take what you've given me right now and then I'll loop back to it.
Yeah.
So in the world of narcotics enforcement, it's all about catching the bigger fish. If you can find a way to take your small fry that you caught and turn it into a Whopper, that's what you do.
So you go for the person who doesn't actually have any cocaine that they have ever had hands on or sold.
You use Danny, D, the Cuban, to get yourself to Rodney. Danny becomes your informant.
And Rodney becomes a scapegoat.
One of the interesting things is that McEnany refers to Rodney as a unicorn instead of a fish because Rodney was such a unique case. He was a man who had no business being involved in the drug trade.
He wasn't involved in the drug trade.
Rodney himself would later reflect, if it weren't for their involvement, referring to the authorities, if it didn't happen the way it did, it would have been me. But he realized that far too late.
Who? Who said that?
Rodney.
Okay.
I think what he was saying is that he would have created a problem regardless if it had been authorities involved or not.
I'm just so annoyed.
Here's where things get even more confounding.
Not more. It can't be more.
It turns out that the drugs that Rodney was supposed to receive weren't even what they seemed. Instead of the pure cocaine he imagined, the agents had concocted a mix of real and sham cocaine, just enough to reach the 5-kilogram threshold needed to arrest him. In reality, they had only pulled 2.2 kilos from the ground in Puerto Rico. And even that was a calcified blend of seawater, sand, and what could loosely be described as cocaine. So supposedly 2.2 kilos of the 5 kilos was the actual Puerto Rican cocaine that Julian had buried.
You can't supplement and more than double the amount of quote unquote cocaine that you found to arrest someone who has never actually laid hands on cocaine for wanting to distribute cocaine, so that some person who you did find with a bag of Oxy gets off despite it being their 3rd strike.
Right.
What is the actual end game?
Much like you, Mark Rosenblum, the attorney for Rodney Hyden, says that his client wasn't charged with distributing what he found, but rather what he was expecting to find. And he refers to it as a crime of anticipation. Rodney had been caught in a web of his own making, snared not by what he possessed, but rather by his intentions. It's tragically ironic that Rodney wasn't taken down by his own actions, but rather kind of these dreams and schemes that he concocted in the desperation of giving his wife the life that she wanted.
Rodney was taken down by happy hour story time.
It certainly started there, didn't it?
And buffoonery.
As Rodney Hyden's case moved forward, it all came down to a trial that would determine his fate. A 4-day trial that would decide whether Rodney would spend the next decade behind bars. For the crime of attempting to possess and distribute over 5 kilograms of cocaine, there was a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. Rodney's defense attorney faced an uphill battle.
Attempting to possess.
Uh-huh.
I hear it.
Yep.
I hear it.
Yep.
He was attempting to possess 2.2 kilos. And you're charging him with more than 5 or with exactly 5.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter. You supplemented 2.8 kilos. It's so irritating.
Rosenblum argued on Rodney's behalf and painted a picture of a man who was ignorant and naive and ultimately entrapped by law enforcement.
Yeah, entrapped is a good word.
Rosenblum's defense hinged on a few key points. First, Rodney didn't know how much a kilogram of cocaine sold for, nor did he have any contacts in the drug trade. He was a player in a game that he didn't understand. And as Rosenblum puts it, Rodney couldn't even move a dime bag, let alone a multi-kilogram haul. And again referred to this being a case of entrapment.
It is entrapment because the police are the ones who delivered the cocaine to him and then arrested him for being in possession of the cocaine.
Yes.
This is not some undercover operation. This is maybe an undercover operation where they came in and they thought it was going to be a big fish, but it turns out it was just a flounder. And so
they made it what they wanted it to be.
Right. That's not actually, we probably could have utilized you focusing your efforts. I don't know. Is there an unsolved murder out there? Are there actual drugs that are being moved around in your state, in your county, in your town?
Homeland Security.
In your land? From sea to shining sea?
So I want the listeners to really understand what we mean when we say entrapment. And in legal terms, entrapment means being induced or persuaded to do something that you wouldn't have the predisposition to commit by a law enforcement official, a government agent, or even a confidential informant. And Rodney's defense team argued that he would have never have committed this crime if it hadn't been for the relentless prodding by the undercover agents and informant.
Here's my plane. Go off. Don't forget to bring a shovel.
Despite Rosenblum making what I think is a compelling argument, there were others who thought differently. Lieutenant Whitney Burnett of the Alachua County Sheriff's Office was blunt in his assessment, saying that he believed that Rodney needed to drop the entrapment angle, calling it, quote, whining. In Burnett's view, Rodney was actively seeking out every connection he could find and was willing to pay people to make his drug dealing dreams come true. The fact that Rodney couldn't find the stash wasn't anyone else's fault. Law enforcement went out there, dug it up, and caught him red-handed, per his assessment. Are you looking for the red hand?
I'm looking for the logic. He wasn't even there when they dug it up. He wasn't red-handed. He wasn't pink-handed. He wasn't white-handed. There was no cocaine on his hands.
During the trial,
there was barely cocaine on their hands. It was not even cocaine. It was sand at that point.
During the trial, the prosecution brought Andy Culpepper to the witness stand.
Oh, the trial is also a waste of resources. Oh.
Andy, ever the charmer, managed to elicit laughs from the judge and jury by claiming that he was building sandcastles during the failed excavation of the cocaine. It was a bizarre
Probably
moment.
With cocaine. At that point, the bags have disintegrated.
The sand is cocaine.
The sand has cocaine in it. He's building cocaine castles.
It was a really bizarre moment in the courtroom, and it kind of underscores the absurdity of the entire situation.
Yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness, because it wasn't really clear until he was talking about sand castles.
Then there was Daniel Jimenez. Back to Danny the Cuban, who took the stand as a confidential informant for the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. His testimony was crucial in painting Rodney as someone who was fully aware of his criminal enterprise. Marco Rocco, the special agent who portrayed the drug kingpin Carlos, also testified. He recounted several one-on-one meetings with Rodney at Casa Maria's, where they discussed the logistics of the deal, including the 8-kilogram fee for smuggling the cocaine back to the U.S. The prosecution laid all of this out for the jury, and as many as 32 bricks of cocaine, though in reality probably closer to 18, 5 of the bricks were real, the rest was the sham cocaine. But it was enough to meet the threshold for a serious federal crime. Despite the defense's best efforts, the jury also did not sympathize with Rodney. He later told GQ that he believed the jury was poisoned against him from the start, particularly by the beginning, where the prosecution showed the video of when he first spoke to D while wiretapped.
He did intend. I understand that he intended, but I can intend to steal from you, but if there's nothing to steal, then I didn't commit a crime.
Yes. It is not in any way close to being the same, but it is somewhat similar to the conversation we had with Mary Vincent, which is the idea that we don't punish potential or wannabe or would-be murders the same as we punish
attempted
an actual murder.
I hear
But we're talking about a violent offense versus drug dealing.
We're also talking in theory, because yes, we are talking about everything that you're saying. But also, I'm thinking about there are actual crimes that were committed that haven't been solved. There are so many things out there that deserve this type of attention. Well, not the type of attention where we would maybe plant evidence, but there are so many actual crimes that have occurred that have been unsolved, that could be solved, or that for some silly reason can't be solved. And if I have heard any silly reason that a case should not be going to trial or have somebody sentenced to 10 years of prison because it's got too much gray area, this is it. This is too much gray area. Who had the cocaine? The police? Arrest them.
It is dishonest and unethical in a lot of ways.
That's my issue. It is unethical. It feels unethical because as much as he was talking about it, was he ever actually going to go do anything until he was presented with a plane? Not even in his bare hands. Plane in his bare hands.
Yeah.
To build sandcastles.
Well, and it's doubtful he could have even found the cocaine on his own had he had the right materials. Who's to say if that would have even been possible? After the guilty verdict was delivered, Rodney and Rosenblum filed an instant motion, arguing that there wasn't enough evidence to support the jury's decision. They questioned the quantity of the cocaine, where it was, and whether or not it was even sellable. But those arguments fell on deaf ears, and the quantity motion was denied.
Sellable is kind of a wild angle to... How would he have known if it was sellable? Because if he did find it, he would have tried to sell it.
Right.
May not have gone very far with that because it was just sand.
Following the guilty verdict, Rodney and Mark filed a motion for leniency, citing the new recommendations from then Attorney General Eric Holder for reduced sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. But again, it didn't seem like anyone was moved by their appeal. However, in a surprising twist, the prosecution recommended a sentence of 30 months instead of the mandatory 10-year minimum, arguing that Rodney's contractor skills could be of greater value to the community if he wasn't locked away for a decade.
I feel better about 30 months. I still think it's too long.
So it's also worth noting that once this guilty verdict had been handed down, we have this judge, Tim Corrigan from the Middle District of Florida, who kind of steps in and he says, we're not going to be doing that minimum sentence of 10 years. And instead says Rodney has the opportunity to do something called a safety valve proffer, which is something I had not heard of before. The safety valve is a provision in federal law that allows for a waiver of the mandatory minimum sentence under certain conditions, specifically for first-time offenders with no previous criminal history. Essentially, it's a way to avoid the harshest penalty if the circumstances so warrant. So after Judge Corrigan steps in, ultimately what happens is that Rodney's only sentenced to 60 days in jail, followed by 5 years of probation. And Judge Corrigan kind of justifies his decision by describing Hayden as Walter Mitty meets Breaking Bad. Here's where I think things become even a little more human. Jamie, Rodney's wife, is visibly emotional throughout this entire process. And she describes how her nosy neighbors had lots of opinions and would frequently ask, are you going to leave him? Were you going to leave him? But Jamie did stand by her husband saying, I promised I'd stand by him because I love him.
Quick question. Was this the life that she signed up for?
Obviously not. She has a little more character than what you might have assumed based on the kind of whining she did at the beginning. Rodney's sentence also included 20 hours of community service per week for Habitat for Humanity over the next 5 years. Ultimately, this ended up not being just a punishment, but a way that Rodney could use his construction skills to give back to the community. Ryan McEnany from Homeland Security seems content with the outcome. From his perspective, the community service was a better use of Rodney's time than sitting in a cell, and it would mean thousands of hours of work that would benefit others. Rodney spent 2 months in Jessup Federal Prison in South Georgia, a facility known for housing white-collar criminals. It's the kind of place where you might bump into someone like Pablo Escobar's top American deputy, or the guy who hacked Scarlett Johansson's phone. A strange mix of characters in this jail. Reflecting on his time there, in the documentary, Rodney wonders aloud, how I didn't see it. How didn't I know? And it's in reference to everything that kind of happens to him. The outlandishness of Julian's story, something that we've talked about, as well as how did I not know that I was being set up? Despite this question haunting him, he's found a lot of solace, or did find a lot of solace, in the work he did post-prison, and is quoted as saying, I've helped a lot of families, and it made me a better person. He also talks about how much joy he got in handing keys over to families after finishing their homes. Not everyone is happy with this outcome, though. D, our favorite informant,
who I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say probably was caught at another time doing something that cost him his third strike.
quite possibly. Well, he is adamant that Rodney knew exactly what he was doing and needed to be held accountable.
I knew exactly what D was doing when he had a bag of Oxy found in his possession, and he needs to be held accountable.
What's funny is that D even talks about ethics and why he thinks that Rodney should have been punished more severely. But I thought that was so ironic, considering how he played such a huge role in his setup. As the dust settled, Rodney's story became one of the most weird American tales. Part tragedy, part farce. Russell, one of Rodney's friends from the Piney Woods crew, commented that it all just made for an even better story in the end. Julian, the man who started it all with his tale of buried treasure, is now living a quieter life. He tends to his pear, plum, and blueberry trees, just trying to feed himself. And he says that even if he had the money from the cocaine, Julian wouldn't know what to do with it. And he's quoted as saying, not my story, not anymore, distancing himself from the legend that had spiraled out of control. Another unanswered question, what about the stash of cocaine? Well, Homeland Security never provided any hard evidence of the cocaine being found. They claimed they didn't have professional photographers or high-tech cameras to document the discovery.
Just a BlackBerry.
So where did the other 27 kilos go? A, Julian was lying from the start. There was never that much cocaine.
Correct.
B.
No. A.
D, the cops destroyed it or did not find it. C, it's still buried out in Culebra, waiting for someone to find it. Lastly, there haven't been any new articles or developments on Rodney's story since 2019. But Hollywood might just keep this legend alive. There's talk that Will Ferrell will star as Rodney Hyden in a movie version of the documentary. And with that, I close the story on Rodney Hyden and the legend of Cocaine Island.
A legend. A legend.
I think that's a good word for it.
Because there's something in there that allows for it to not be true. Which is, I'm going to stick with A on this one.
I think that A is the best choice.
And I think that when they went there and they found out that it was A, they were kind of like, but we're planning on taking him out like he's some sort of linchpin in this big scheme. So then they thought that they were going to be able to get him, but then there wasn't actually anything to really get him on.
He's not a bigger fish.
Right. He's not a bigger fish than D.
Yeah, he's not a bigger fish. They then describe him as a unicorn. And
They're
my
not
thoughts are
wrong.
like yours, is that, yeah, unicorns are fiction. Like, you're not getting anything of substance. You're taking someone and I guess maybe making an example out of them.
Yeah, maybe.
Or saying that you were able to make this kind of arrest. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we know that that's not reality.
At the end of the day, to make your case, you had to bring in fake cocaine.
McEnany says that the reason they stopped having D come around is because his presence as an informant would have made the situation entrapment. That the way that they presented it and it existed was not entrapment because Danny was no longer a part of the equation. Now, there's not a whole lot of elaboration on that, but that's what he says.
Okay, that story was buffoonery at the highest level and frustrating, but it was a good story. It was entertaining as well, just much like a Julian story.
Thanks. I've always wanted to be a Julian.
Oh, that's okay.
I wonder what kind of crime I can get you to commit.
Oh, goodness. Who am I in this scenario?
Oh, Rodney.
I'm Rodney?
I guess you can be what? Russell? You want to be Russell?
I think I'm one of the nameless players.
There you go. You're the elephant owner.
I own elephants. Far too busy caring for them. A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating and leave a review.
Recommend us to a friend and make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Like us on Facebook at Until the End of Crime and join our discussion group.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so send us an email with questions, requests, or episode suggestions.
And download these episodes. It's the biggest help to us. Download, and share it with a friend. Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.